Is it okay if I move it here during our?
Yes, we do, Sundays.
Yeah, I know, but I just wondered if it makes any difference.
You just have to know when there, so you swing the camera around.
Glad to see everyone this morning. Certainly happy that we have a wonderful Lord's Day to commemorate the death of Him who loved us and died that we might live. I'm so thankful for that. And we're always appreciative of visitors. But with us this morning is Joni Johnson. And I don't think we've seen each other since 1982 or 81, maybe 80. How many years is that? 44? Of course, neither one of us has changed a bit. Both of us used to have dark hair, didn't we, Joni? I remember yours were extremely brown and black, seemed like. But it's so good to see her. Kind of grew up with her and Tim, her husband, and the families were just some of our favorites and great encouragements to me. And I appreciate her and just so glad to see her. Sorry about the occasion. I wanted to tell you real briefly that I'm sorry I couldn't attend the memorial service for Sister Bobby's son, but I had committed myself to be in Atmore yesterday, and I'm really glad I could. We had a really fine study, and there is a man there who wants to be baptized. It's just a matter of going through the hoops with the prison officials to do that. And so I'm really, really thankful about that. And we had, I guess, 7, maybe with the rest of us who were teaching, maybe 9 or 10. But altogether, it went well. And I want you to know about things like that because, you support us in the work. And that's, though what we do down there doesn't affect necessarily somebody who's baptized and added to the number here, they still have souls. And anywhere we go, whether it be Donaldson or somewhere, in Pinson or Hueytown or McCalla or Hoover or St. Mountain Brook, wherever it is that we can talk to people about the gospel, as well as Pleasant Grove, it's good. And we want to try to use our lives as efficiently and effectively as we possibly can to bring people out of sin and to the Lord. We are in Exodus in our private readings. Exodus 1 through last night would have been Exodus 9, and that's where we'll just briefly review. Exodus, the word Exodus means what? The way out, the road out, to exit. You see our signs here, and it's from that same derivation. And so I have made the comment before that, in trying to rightly divide God's word, you try to, just like any document, any reading, any document you might read, you try to analyze what's being said. And it seems like the first 19 chapters compose a unit, and I'm keeping the alliteration, redemption of Israel. They're redeemed, they're bought out of slavery, and they come down to Mount Sinai, chapter 19, and then in 20 through 40, all of you know chapter 20 is the giving of the what? The 10 Commandments, the beginning of the giving of the law. And so it looks like, if you want to keep the alliteration going, redemption of Israel 1 through 19, revelation to Israel 20 through 40. The law was given, the 10 Commandments, and so on. All right, so in chapter 1, we find that the people of God are what? What's their condition? They're slaves, yeah. And it starts off by the 70 who went down and how they multiplied to the degree that Pharaoh thought they might ally themselves with their enemies. And so he has all the baby boys who are, put to death, who are born. And so here is the problem. They've become an enslaved people. When we left Joseph in Genesis 50, Joseph was still what? What was his position? Second in command. But a lot of things have changed. Egyptian history would indicate there was a change of dynasties. And the ones who had been favorable toward Israel, and Joseph in particular, it had changed, and they weren't that way toward Israel. And so there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and so he enslaves them. Well, God's remedy, remember Genesis 15, the extended land promise, as well as the promise to Abraham that you, Abraham, will go, you will die in a good old age, and your descendants will go into a land that is not theirs, which is the land of Egypt, and will come out with great substance. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So what has happened now, the iniquity of the Amorites is close to be full, close to being full, and the time is for Israel to exit. So who is God's remedy in chapter 2? Moses. And so we have the birth of Moses. He grows to years. He's in fact 40 years of age, and we see what happens that he has to leave because he has tried to intercede. Actually, he kills an Egyptian who was afflicting one of his brethren. Next day, two brethren are in a squabble, and he tries to interfere, and then he finds out that they know that he had killed the Egyptian the day before. So he flees into the land of Midian. And in 3 and 4, what we have here, he's been keeping his father Jethro's sheep, and God appears to him in the burning bush and tells him, I want you to deliver my people Israel. And so in 3 and 4, we have God's discussion with Moses. And Moses remonstrates with God, I'm just not the one to do this. And God tells him, well, I'll be with you. Well, I can't speak too well. Well, I'll give you your brother Aaron. He can speak well. I'd just rather you have somebody else. And God said, you've got a responsibility here. And so in chapter 5, he goes back, and then 4 he goes back, and then in 5 he meets with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, okay, you seem like good people, I'll let your people go, right? No, he actually makes it what for Israel? Makes it a whole lot worse in the building of those, the bricks, right? And then in chapter 6, God renews his promises, the American Standard topical heading has. He basically reassures Moses that things are going to be okay. In fact, look at verse 2. God spake unto Moses and said, I am Jehovah. I appeared unto Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, Jehovah, I was not known to them. Just a few times when the King James uses the word Jehovah. It is in the King James, isn't it, Richard? Yeah, I thought so. I was not known. Remember, Jehovah means ever existing one. Great. Who said that? Was that you, Joni? Or who? Sister Eleanor? Good. Ever existing one. Isn't it neat that the names of God coincide with the very character of God? And so, as he said, hey, I made promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I was known by them as God Almighty. But now I'm going to be known as Jehovah. I'm always here. I'm always existing. The covenant keeping, promise keeping, I made those promises back then. I'm still alive to fulfill them now. And I think that's the significance of it. So he reassures them. He brings this genealogy, the lineage back, and indicates, hey, everything I've said is going to happen. So then in 7 through 12, what do we have? The plagues. And we'll go 7, 8, and 9 when we're finished. In 7, what do we have? The plagues of, Moses appears before Pharaoh the second time. And Pharaoh is, again, he's recalcitrant. He will not let them go. And so God begins to send the plagues. The first being the water turning to blood. And then in chapter 8, the frogs, lice, and flies. In chapter 9, murrain, or the disease of the cattle, livestock, what else? Boils and hail, right. And the magicians start out trying to imitate, but eventually they fail, and they are covered up with the plagues as well. We'll have to stop there and go right on into our lesson because of our time, as well as the fact that that's not, really our purpose, but except to review. And I hope it's helpful. I hope you're finding it all, faith building as we continue to go through. All right, we're Wednesday night. We began a study in Matthew 19. Joni, we're talking about the life of Jesus. Sister Eleanor may have already told you this. But let's see here. Why aren't we moving here? Okay, so here we are, the years of preparation, and I'm not going. I trust you're not cheating. The years of preparation followed by the beginning ministry, which event begins it with his baptism. In 3 to 6 months, then he goes north to Galilee for the better part of 2 years. Then he winds around in the periods of retirement, and then he sets his face toward Jerusalem. That's where we are. And in the closing ministry, primarily dealt with by Luke and John. And we looked at this Mount Wednesday, I believe, how he had been passing along through the borders of Samaria and Galilee, crossed the river, and what we're finding here in Matthew 19, 1 and 2, is he's somewhere here in Perea when the Pharisees come to him and say, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? So that's where we are in this. And I mentioned Wednesday night that the Pharisees were trying to set Jesus in opposition against one of the two leading opinions among Jewish leaders. Some said, that you could divorce your wife for any cause, and some said no, that the unseemly thing of Deuteronomy 24 was adultery. We pointed out that actually adultery was not punishable by divorce, but by what? Death by stoning. And so you could divorce. And so what we find then is, in 3 through 6, they come to Jesus trying him, and they said, is it lawful for a man to do what? Divorce or put away his wife for every cause. And he refers them back to what? The beginning. And he kind of chastises them. Have ye not read? Don't you know better than to ask a question like that? That he who made them male and female said, for this cause shall a man what? Leave his father and mother, cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. There are no more two but one flesh. So therefore, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Well, a follow-up question, 7 through 9, and that is, well, why then did Moses do what? Give a bill of divorce, or command to give a bill of divorcement to put her away. And he said, Moses did not command it or authorize divorce. He simply permitted it or allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning, it wasn't so. That was not God's original intent. And then he said, and I say unto you, you can quote it with me, whosoever shall put away his wife except for fornication and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is put away, what? Commits adultery. Right. All right. What was the response of the reaction to the disciples? Said, that's exactly what we've been thinking all along, right? If this is the case of a man with his wife, it's better not to marry. And Jesus basically said, there are three. It actually applies to everyone who does what? Everyone who marries. And then the exception is that there are some who would not marry. They would have no desire to marry, no desire for any sexual relations. And he gives the three, or they might allow pressing responsibilities, and I'll get to that in a second, to override whatever desires they would have. So he says there are eunuchs who were what? Born that way, congenital. And then there are eunuchs that were made that way by men. We'd say surgical, like Daniel and his friends. Third, there are eunuchs that make themselves that for the kingdom of heaven's sake. And I take that to be, as some of the newer translations translate it, that they would forego marriage for the sake of the kingdom. That they would, like Paul and Barnabas, they would forego marriage in order to try to do something else. And I think I've known a few, not many, but a few who wanted to do something in life so badly and they wanted a wife, wanted companionship, all that, but they had a drive that was stronger than that, and they wanted to. I know of a fellow who wanted his girlfriend wanted them to get married, and he wanted to finish school first because he said, I want to marry you, I love you, but I want to do this first. And he did. He finished school first. He was pursuing a degree that was pretty stringent. And so, there's some cases like that with Paul, Barnabas. He even said in 1 Corinthians 7, it's better for you to remain as I am. But to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife and every woman have her own husband. And so, of course, that was during the present what? 1 Corinthians 7. Present distress. Yeah. Because normally marriage is considered a good thing. True or false? True. Yeah. In fact, in Genesis 2, he said it is not good that man should be alone. So I'll make a help suitable or help meet for it. Okay. I've got several charts, but I wanted to answer our questions. Did we answer any questions Wednesday night? I don't remember. I didn't watch the video of it. I'm sorry, what was that, Patty?
We did answer, I've got marked on page 48, I've circled 10 and 11, I'm not sure if we did.
Yeah, that's right. We did get under there. Okay, thank you. All right. I mentioned about, because I didn't remember we got off on Romans 7 and the bound in marriage. I made a chart for that. Goodspeed translates Matthew 19, I tell you that whosoever divorces his wife on any ground but her unfaithfulness and marries another woman commits adultery. Last part of the verse, and he that marries her when she is put away commits adultery. So what four possible situations could arise in which one would find himself or herself if divorce and remarriage occur? All right, you've got two categories. I can divorce my wife, and this is the first category, either for fornication or not for fornication. Now, on the other hand, I can be the defendant. I can be divorced or put away either because of my fornication or not for my fornication. So there are four situations. You can put away a person either for fornication or whatever other reason, whether it be incompatibility. Of course, incompatibility can be for fornication. It's hard to get a divorce for fornication right now. It has been for years. Sometimes an attorney will tell a person it's best for you, though that is the real reason, it's best for you not to put it on there because of all the legal ramifications that will come and trying to prove it and all that. But nonetheless, put away either for fornication or not. Be put away either because you were guilty of adultery or not guilty of adultery. You're still a put away person. And so as a result of that, there are four cases that a person could find himself. All right, number 11, from the previous question, who only has a scriptural right to remarry following a divorce? If we have done what? Not committed adultery and put our spouse away because of fornication. That's right. History teaches that the Jews took a loose view toward remaining with one wife or husband for life, similar to our society today. How is that implied in verse 10? You already mentioned it. If the case is so with a man and his wife, it's best what? Not to marry. I remember like it's yesterday when we lived in Hobart, Indiana. We had a basement to the church building, and we had a little elevator. It was not not like on a big building. It was just, you would just go down maybe 8 feet or so. And we had to have it inspected, and I was available, so I was there. And I had written a little tract on the subject here and put it in our track rack with a lot of, and the fellow who was there, it was track rack right by the elevator. And he noticed that and he pulled it out, and it didn't take him, I don't think, 45 seconds to glance over what we had. He said, if this is true, 90% of the people I know in Hobart are living in adultery. And I said, well, unfortunately, that's true about everywhere. And so we had a really good little talk, and it was just like it was, wow, I didn't know the Bible said that. I didn't know that. Brother Noble wrote an article years ago. Y'all know Brother Noble, Roger's daddy. Did you know him, Lynn?
Yes, Marvin. Yes.
Marvin Noble. He was a great man. Preached at Flint Hill way, way back. But he wrote an article years ago, and in it he was talking about when they lived up north, that they were in a house, and he was conducting a wedding, hot, and had the bridesmaids, and it was all in a house, and it was real stuffy, but he read Matthew 19. He just read these passages without comment. And at the end of the reading, one of the bridesmaids ran out of the wedding crying. The article was entitled, "She Understood." She understood. And he made the comment after the illustration and then the passage. He said it doesn't take that much to understand what Jesus said. Whosoever puts away his wife, except for fornication, and marries another, what? Commits adultery. Well, the young lady was living in adultery. And she didn't know that. And just the reading of those passages was powerful enough that I wish I could find that article. I may have it in a file somewhere. Do any of you remember that? You remember that article? It was just because people say, well, brethren take all these views, and some say you can do this and so. I know that. There are a lot of people who take various views on baptism. That it's just an opinion. It doesn't have anything to do with salvation. You can find people that tell you a lot of I was so taken aback when I found out that LaGard Smith, who published the narrated Bible and a lot of other fine stuff, took the position that hell is not everlasting punishment. Basically, the Jehovah's Witness position that you just annihilated. And so you can find people who will teach you whatever you want to hear. And that doesn't make it right. It just means that you can find people like that. But you could, going back to the simplicity of God's will. In fact, you can, even without having to go in the details of verse 9, you can get the general thinking of Jesus in the earlier verses. Have you not read that he who made them in the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and what God has joined together, what? Let not man put asunder. So the general thinking is once you're married, you're married. Don't get out of it. Don't try to get out of it. And then when they ask that second question, what about the case of Deuteronomy 24, Moses commanding that a bill of divorcement be given, all that, he said, well, God permitted it. Moses allowed it. He didn't command it, but he suffered you because of the hardness of your hearts. But from the beginning, it wasn't so. That gives you, again, even if you just eliminated verse 9 and any questions that grow out of that, you can see the intent of God and Christ through those first 8 verses. That divorce is just, that's out of the picture. So, all right, let's see, 13. When the disciples understood the significance of Jesus' words that marriage is for life, and the only scriptural cause one can put away his spouse is for fornication, their loose view prompted them to think it's better not to marry. Jesus did not back down or soften his reply, but in essence said, you're right. These words apply to everyone who marries. What 3 groups of people does Jesus say it would be better not to marry, and hence those to whom this teaching does not apply? Well, we've already answered that. The eunuchs. Eunuchs just wouldn't want to marry. And so I think the implication is here, it applies, what I'm saying applies to everybody who marries. And certainly it doesn't apply to anybody who doesn't, or doesn't desire to marry. The first 2 categories are certainly eunuchs in the literal sense of the word. The third must refer to those who have decided to remain unmarried or in order to free themselves from responsibilities of family life, in order to give more time for the kingdom of heaven's sake. What two men could be considered examples of this category of spiritual eunuchs? I don't use that word, but that's really what they were. Who's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 9? Paul and Barnabas. Yeah, Paul and Barnabas. Did somebody say Cephas? Did I hear? Cephas actually was what? Married. Peter was married, yeah. In fact, Peter's mother-in-law was one on whom Jesus worked a miracle, right? So Peter was a married man, and that corresponds to the fact that Peter was also what? 1 Peter 5, verse 1. The elders, yeah, I exhort, fellow elders, I exhort. All right, comment or question? I've got some charts that I wanted to go back. By the way, I wanted to mention something. I didn't jot this down, but it came back. One of the few things that comes back to me. Most of your newer translations translate the term fornication in the older translations as sexual immorality. I remember talking with several older brethren years ago when I first started hearing that. I think a lot of brethren think it's not the best translation. Sexual immorality is basically another form. The translators use it as just another way of saying fornication. But to be immoral sexually could include things that are not fornication. For instance, petting, lasciviousness, Galatians 5. The things that happen between a man and a woman that are short, we might say, not all the way to adultery, but you would say they're sexual immoral. There was a fellow, let me give you an example. There was a fellow who preached up in North Alabama who was always good to me, and I had some respect for him. There was a distant relative of his wife, young girl, I say young girl, she was a teenager, and he fondled her. And his wife then wanted to, that is, the preacher's wife wanted to divorce him for fornication. And there were several brethren who said, you know, what he did was wrong, but he didn't commit fornication. Fornication basically means sexual intercourse. Any illicit sexual intercourse, Vine says. Fornication can involve homosexuality, lesbianism. It can involve, obviously, between people who are not married. Usually the difference between fornication and adultery is fornication is any illicit sexual activity, and then adultery is kind of a subset of that. Adultery usually involves somebody who is married, and but it's the same act. It's just usually in a different kind of circumstance. So, whosoever shall put away his wife except for fornication, any illicit sexual activity, sexual intercourse, and marries another, commits adultery. Why? Because you're really bound to that other, you're bound to the other one, and so you don't have a right, and you're committing you're committing sexual activity with somebody you don't have a right to. Does that make sense? I remember David Pratt up in Zion, Illinois, had an article. It was an outstanding. I thought it was an outstanding article, and he was talking about this idea. And he had like a timeline almost. And here's a person who's interested, and then they hold hands, and then they hug, and then they're necking, and then they're petting, and then where do you draw the line? Well, sexual intercourse is the but everything that would come, not everything, but everything that would come for, that would excite someone sexually, like lasciviousness describes, would to me be sexual immorality. That's why I say, we can't be too careful with words. We want to define things exactly like the Lord did in order to understand them properly. So a person could fondle another girl or something, and it's lasciviousness. It's what the Bible defines as lascivious, but it might not be a fornication or adultery. Does that make sense to everybody? Brother Gene, you look like you want to say something. Anyone?
I think it's a mistake to use terms that lighten the seriousness of
Yes,
the sin.
exactly. I think so. I think that's exactly right. Anybody else? Joni, feel free to say. Okay. I wanted so we went over this also Wednesday night. Some additional implications or lessons. Obviously, Jesus believed in the literal creation account he used even at the beginning of the creation. In Mark 10, he made mankind male and female. Not a Q. He made them M and F, not M, F, and Q. Questionable. It's interesting, guys. All of us are adults in here, and I don't want to be too graphic. But if you look up the Hebrew words for male and female in Genesis 1, the very words describe the anatomical differences. I'll say it that way. And so, there are only two genders. There are only two sexes, in male and female. Anything that somebody questions or what is, it's usually some mental dysfunction that comes as a result of other things. And anyway, when an eligible couple marries, they've been joined by God. It's a divine relation when scriptural. I'll say more about that in just a moment. Fornication is the only reason an innocent party that is innocent of fornication can divorce his or her guilty spouse. All right, this is the chart I wanted to put together. I tried to draw it on the board. If you can read my writing on a chalkboard, a whiteboard, you are great. You were just doing great because I write so terribly. That's why I rather do it on PowerPoint. But the question, what makes adultery adultery? A scriptural marriage is when a man and woman are both married and bound. Now let's stop just for a minute and go back. We glanced at it Wednesday night. But turn over to Romans 7. Romans 7. Those of us who, students trying to understand, realize that Romans 7 is showing that these Roman Christians are freed from the law and are actually married to Christ. True? Is that right? They're freed from the law. Let's just begin reading in verse 1. Or are ye ignorant, brethren? For I speak to men who know the law, that the law has dominion over a man for so long time as he lives. But the woman that hath a husband is bound by law to the husband while he lives. But if the husband die, she is discharged or freed from the law of the husband. That is the law of God that bound her to her husband. So that if while the husband lives, she be joined, your translation may be married. If while the husband lives, she be joined or married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if the husband die, she is free from the law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be joined or married to another man. Now, the point is that he's speaking of their being dead to the law and married to Christ. Look at verse 4. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also were made dead to the law through the body of Christ, that ye should be joined or married to another, even to him who was raised from the dead, that we might bring forth fruit unto God. All right, so here's the situation we find ourselves. And it helps us, I think. Now remember, he does, Lee and I were talking about this on the way home Wednesday night, that she said, you didn't say anything about the fact that Romans 7 does not include anything about divorce and remarriage as per Matthew 19. Well, a little, but it doesn't give all the details, simply because he's using it as an illustration to make the point that you're dead to the law, and since you're dead to the law, you can be married to another, that is to Christ. And so he didn't go into all the details, Jesus did. But there's enough information there to really help us. Scriptural marriage is when we're married as well as bound. That is, God has joined, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. A scriptural marriage. Now, can anybody get married, basically? Yeah, even man and man can get married. Anybody can get married. But just because you're married and you're actually married, you've got a certificate and all that, that doesn't mean it's scriptural, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're bound to each other. But a scriptural marriage does. You're bound. God is joined together. And the word bound is deo, to mean you're put under obligation. You're bound to the responsibilities that you have to each other. However, a marriage can exist, but at the same time be adultery when one has no scriptural right to the other. Hence, a person is married to one when bound to another. Let's say, here's this couple. They were married, and they were bound. It was a scriptural marriage. However, this fella decides he's going to divorce his wife for a cause other than fornication. And he marries this second one. And so that's where Romans 7 explains it. For the woman that has a husband is bound by law to the husband while he lives. But if the husband dies, she's discharged. So that if while the husband lives, let's just say that's the husband, that's the wife, and she's married or joined to another, it makes it what? Adultery. Because she's actually bound or under obligation on the part of God to this one. But if she leaves him, obviously not for fornication, and marries another, she's an adulterer. Now, according to Jesus, if she divorced him for fornication, what? She can remarry, and it's not adultery. Yeah. Okay.
So she has to wait till he dies before she can remarry.
Yeah. And guess what happens? People have murdered their spouses because of that. So they feel like they can, what's worse, murder or adultery? Yes, Josh.
I was listening to this podcast the other day, and even back in the 1920s, I've living in the 20s, but back in the 1920s, Reno, Nevada got this pretty much the start.
Divorce capital of the world.
Divorce. And that was real interesting to me. And I just wondered, was it really prevalent before that time?
No. In our country, divorce was not prevalent. In fact, even in my life, I can remember when somebody was divorced, it was like, wow,
It affected the whole family.
What's that, Brother
It
Charlie?
was a shame to the whole family.
It was a shame to the whole family. And even if a person was not guilty of adultery, it was as if something wrong happened. Was somebody a party to the other one wanting to leave? There was always a cloud. And whether it needed to be or not, it just was. That's just the way things were. But in high school, when you have people like in the homecoming court, I've seen this in high school games, homecoming, and you have the girl, the daughter of Mr. and so, y'all know what I'm talking about. How many of them? There's a different name, different last name for everybody involved. And it's just the way things are. I really believe there are so many things that go together on it. First, there's a rejection of the knowledge of God. People don't believe there's a God. People don't believe there's a hell to avoid and a heaven to win. And so they don't even think about passages like this. Well, how many people have never even read these passages? How many people have never read Mark 16:16? They don't know he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. But are we going to be saved because we're ignorant? Absolutely not. What's 2 Thessalonians 1 say? to them that know not God and obey not the gospel of his Son, Christ, when he comes, will render vengeance on them that know not God and obey not his gospel. So not to know God, not to know his word is not a help, it's a hindrance, it's a terrible thing. And so there's the need to teach our young people about the seriousness of marriage, to marry somebody who will help you get to heaven, who respects God, respects God's word on marriage, and who knows it and has a commitment for all of these factors. Because it's so, but what happens is, we marry somebody on the whim, or just, the rebound is somebody, or he just showed a little bit of interest and nobody else did, so I married him, and or she did with me, and so I just thought, well, that's my last chance. There's a little girl on the bus, and she came up to me. She said, "Mr. Owens, somebody blew a kiss at me." I told Lee later, I said, I was so tempted to say, "You better not complain, it might be your last chance." I probably shouldn't even think like that. But anyway, it was precious when you got a kindergartner who says that. But anyway, the need to really teach along these lines is so significant. And of course, practice it, support it. And, this is not, it bothers me to no end. It frosts me, really, when people say, "Oh, that's just Church of Christ doctrine." No. I'm not giving anybody any opinion at all. We're just reading the passage and trying to understand what the words mean. There's no opinion there. It's just understanding what the word says. Okay, I've been talking too much. Anybody ready?
What about the waiting game?
The waiting game, I don't buy it. Does everybody know what Randy just asked about? The waiting game is like this. The divorce, let's say a husband and wife are married, and let's say the husband, let's say here's the husband over here, and he just, let me back up. Here's the husband, and here's the wife. And the husband, let's say the wife divorces him for no cause. No cause. And so they both are unmarried. They're both separated from each other. And then a little later, she goes over here and marries husband number 2. What some brethren are saying is, she is now living in adultery, therefore I could mentally put her away and go over here and marry the second wife. That's basically what you're talking about, wasn't it? And it's sometimes called the waiting game. You wait till the other person either commits fornication or marries somebody, which would put them in adultery, and you say, okay, they're now living in adultery, I can go remarry. I've got a chart on that. Let's see here. The general rule is anyone who divorces and remarries, adultery occurs. Anyone who puts away his mate, remarries, commits adultery. Anyone who marries a put away person, both commit adultery. And so, for the cause, the divorce has to be on the grounds of, or for the cause of adultery. It's got to be the cause, not the result. And here's the chart I want to show you. Here's God's arrangement. If you're married but fornication occurs, the innocent can divorce the guilty for fornication, and the innocent may remarry. But what the waiting game has is, here's a marriage, is scriptural, then there's a divorce, not for fornication. Then fornication occurs afterwards. And then the brethren say, then, the other party can remarry. Fornication becomes the effect, not the cause of divorce. And that's, I think, why the middle divorce, or as we sometimes call it, the waiting game, why that's wrong, why it's unscriptural. The divorce has to be for fornication, for the cause of fornication, not for some other reason. And then when the party commits adultery, okay, well, they're convicted, I can go ahead and do it. Does that make sense? Good question by Randy. Okay, let's stop there. Lord willing, we'll pick up. It's interesting, the next thing that comes in the life of Christ is where these, a little child, the product of a good marriage, it comes to Jesus, they're brought to Jesus to be blessed, and he talks about that. Okay, thank you for your help.